Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Blackout at 3rd and Main by Aaron Shotwell.
Narrated by Barnabas Deimos.
I've always had a fascination for the paranormal, investigating ghost stories and urban legends since I was a kid. If I ever heard a story that included the words, "They say if you go there at midnight," then I was there, at midnight, waiting for a genuine encounter. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't. If you chase a shadow long enough, you're bound to find the caster. Trust me when I say this, you don't want to know. Yeah, I know, that's how these stories usually begin. Please don't read this, or I don't care if you believe me. It piques your curiosity, keeps you reading. Well, I'm warning you now, and I want you to listen carefully. You don't want to know. Keep your thrills vicarious. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You're better off wondering and guessing, because curiosity without discretion is a dangerous thing. I'm going to tell you how I learned it the hard way, and I hope it will keep most of you from meddling too much for your own good. You don't want to find yourself living like me. I'm not even sure I can call it living anymore. I only hope I can finish this in time, because most of the time I have these days doesn't belong to me. There have been so many myths, tales of gods, demons, spirits, and creatures of worlds beyond our own. The old stories changed over time, and beliefs changed with them. Yet, somehow mankind has always feared and worshipped the same things. Psychologists see this as a need for closure. They say we fear the unknown, and we would accept anything to make sense of the world, even if it means believing in a total fabrication. Everything has a rational explanation, right? We live in a secular age, so that's the assumption. Then again, they also say that where there is smoke, there is fire. When I heard and read all of these stories, I came to question what society told me. Could they all really be superstitions of ignorant primitives inspired by firelight, paranoia, and mind-altering substances? Or were these truly things to be feared, even before the songs and legends? That's what I wanted to find out. So I buried my nose in mythology books and ghost stories, and I kept my ear to the ground for urban legends. I explored them all. Well, all the local ones anyways. I tested everything from the ghost ship of Hudson River to the infamous Bloody Mary. Every search was a disappointment, but it never discouraged me. It was a great hobby, and I still went through the motions just for the thrill. As I had come to expect, I never exactly struck gold. That is, not until the night of the Blackout at 3rd and Main. It was the night of spring break after a long and grueling semester. Most of the other students migrated to Manhattan for loud, obnoxious parties. My small group of friends and I, on the other hand, preferred peace and quiet. Apparently, peace and quiet on that particular night meant a trip to a lively Irish pub called Piper's Kilt. Don't ask me what the hell we were thinking. I couldn't tell you. That is where I met a drunken old immigrant by the name of Tom. Tom was a strange man, which made the conversation all the more entertaining. Even if we did have to shout over some surprisingly upbeat song about a sinking ship, over the customary pint of Guinness, I told him about my little hobby, and he told me a story that, now, I wish I'd never heard. He said that Irish tradition runs far deeper than its Catholic years, and he told me about the long-held Celtic legends of the Fae. He told me of the Banshee, of the Fomorian giants, and of the leprechauns. To that last one, he added, "I'll have you know, they are not the little people you've been told of, Sonny Jim." Aside from the conversation, the audience participation folk songs tend to grow on you once you're good and buzzed, and we stayed longer than I had expected. After a few more rounds, the night ended just as one would expect. A sobering visit to a terrible diner with terrible coffee. A dear friend also made it a point to get hammered beyond the point of no return, and I had to drive him home so he wouldn't end up parking his car in someone's living room. I slept on the couch with the intent of taking him to pick up his car in the morning, provided that he didn't wind up in a coma. I'd have been a hypocrite to look down on him, though. He had done the same for me in the past. Twice. So, after helping him up to his bedroom, nearly breaking my back in the process, I retired on the couch. I passed out after 4 episodes of an I Love Lucy marathon and a couple of annoying infomercials. Ordinarily, after a hearty helping of alcohol, it wouldn't take me so long to find sleep. That, however, was when I'm in my own bed. I never slept well in strange places. Plus, I still had that spirited racket of the old dun cow running through my head, along with old Tom's fascinating stories. I wish those waking hours would have lasted. They are the last normal memories I have. The last memories that I can confidently call my own. A few hours later, well into the hangover I had earned, I woke up to a dark house. Every standby light for every electronic device turned black, including the clocks. I peered through the window behind me, lifted one of the blinds, and stared out across the street. Every porch light had died at some point in the night, and I couldn't see much of anything. I figured a storm must have rolled overhead and killed the power on the block. I'd slept through louder things on nights like this, after all. I was ready to write it off and go back to sleep, but then I looked at my watch. The second hand ticked just past midnight, then slowed to a stop. Old Tom's final story came to mind.
The old believers called him the Black Gambler, he told me, the tempter and trickster of the Fae folk, the greedy for wealth and power bartered with him their souls, called him on the darkest midnight hour, and he came as a dark man at the crossroads.
It could have been a coincidence, sure. Most people probably would have ignored it. I, however, had a tendency to dismiss reason in favor of whimsy. It came with the territory. If ever there was a time to test the myth, I wouldn't have found one better. Of course, I had no expectations, as usual. I would take 5 minutes of my time to humor the old man, another 2 or 3 to take a much-needed leak, and head back to bed. With that plan in mind, I stepped at the front door and into the night. My first thought was that my previous assumption was wrong. I could smell no rainfall, could feel no moisture on the air, and there were no puddles or wet spots. There had been no storm. It didn't stir me, though. Blackouts can have other causes. More concerning was the darkness and silence. It felt foreboding and wrong, but I dismissed it like everything else. I was just allowing my mind to play tricks on me. That was all. Just letting myself feel the fear I was supposed to feel, and the feeling subsided a bit when I saw the starlight overhead.
That is the meeting place,
he told me.
Crossroads represent choice and consequence, and that's where you'll find him if he hears your call.
So, minding my step in the dark, I approached the nearest intersection to my wasted friend's front porch, and I glanced at the street sign as I stood at the curb. 3rd and Main. I stared at it for a moment before fishing in my jacket pocket for the next step.
If you wish an audience with the Black Gambler, you must dig a shallow hole at your nearest corner. In that hole, bury a single key. That is the ticket to the space between our worlds and theirs. The place where he can see you, and he may allow you to see him.
Somehow, when I followed Tom's story, I'd imagined an old dirt road in an open field. I'd imagined an old antique key, a heavy thing you might suspect would open a dungeon or an old cellar. It felt ridiculous to make do with what I had on hand, and hoped this Fae person wouldn't be too particular. Fortunately, I had a selection of useless keys that would have impressed the janitor. I pulled out my key ring and selected a forgotten old thing that probably opened a padlock I lost. Part of its silver coating peeled away from the copper base. I removed a hefty clump of my dear friend's front lawn and placed it beneath, then returned the soil and patted it in. The job wasn't neat, but I doubt he would have cared. He wasn't exactly a proud gardener.
Once the key's in the earth, you've opened the door between our worlds and theirs. Only mortals with dire purpose venture to the land between, so be careful and be sure. Be sure you're ready, lad, and don't step into the road until you are.
With a deep, sarcastic breath, I assured myself that I was sure, and took my first step into the road, heading for the center of the intersection. I stood there waiting, with my quiet, cynical streak, for 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 20. 20 minutes became a week, which became 30 seconds. 2 days, 5 months, an hour, 20 years, an instant and an eternity. Before I knew what was happening, my sense of time slipped away as I spiraled into a sudden, seemingly endless nightmare. At some point in that timeless hell, the trance over me subsided, and I became aware of my surroundings again. This was the land between. I had expected it to be a state of mind, some exaggeration of an old druid's meditation, but it was real. That is, if real is an accurate word to describe it. It was unlike any place on Earth, unlike anything I had ever felt. It's hard to explain to someone who has never set foot there, but I'll try. At first glance, it looks much the same as it does in our world. It has the same structures, the same colors. But you know, something isn't right. That world is too still, like a rigor mortis snapshot of something that should be alive. There's no wind, no breath of life. It's a world not meant for us, and you come into it deaf and numb. You feel no heat or cold against your skin. You don't feel the ground beneath your feet, not even the movements of your own body. It's like an unending tomb, a world of stone where you feel nothing and float aimlessly in complete silence.
Listen for a voice, lad. That's him talking. You'll know it when you hear it. He sees you. That's when your test begins.
Of course, I'd know it when I heard it. It would be the only thing I could possibly hear. And sure enough, I did. It was faint, almost not there at all, but I heard it. Under any other circumstances, I doubt I would have called it a voice. No human lips were forming those syllables, and that deep groan was not a sound from human vocal cords. Nevertheless, it was speaking to me. I can't tell you what it said, if anything at all. It was just an acknowledgement of some sort. Maybe even a greeting. It terrified me.
You will first meet with a great beast, a thing of nightmares, and it'll know you better than you know yourself. You will face it, and you will face all of your fears, all of the things that ever struck your heart cold, all of the things that ever haunted your dreams.
He warned me.
You must not run. To do so will break the right, and to break the right is to insult the gambler. You won't want to insult him, Sonny Jim. I can promise you that.
The thing approached, and I felt its rumbling steps beneath my feet. Whatever robbed me of my senses began to return them ever so slowly. Or perhaps they returned on their own out of some overpowering, instinctive necessity. Whatever the case, I would receive the beast with every primal sense fully alert. It emerged from the darkness down the road, a colossal mountain of fur and muscle towering over the dead street lamps, its grotesque form veiled in silhouette. It seemed all at once as a giant wildcat, a hulking bull, and a monstrous bear. And it lowered its face to less than 2 feet from mine. It growled and huffed, its breath like a hot sandstorm stinging my face, and I saw myself in its eyes. I saw myself as it saw me. That is where the true terror began. Old Tom was right. I did face all of my fears, every one of them. The fear of death, the fear of heights, of drowning, the fear of losing my job or of dying alone, the fear of accomplishing nothing in my life, the fearing the pressure and responsibility of leadership, the fear of my creepy neighbor across the hall, the fear of lightning storms and of the dark. Even my childhood fears, once funny in hindsight, came crawling back. The fear of seeing my grandmother for the first time without her dentures, the fear of the monster in my closet, the fear of large dogs, the fear of school bullies, and the fear I once felt when I was separated from my mother at a crowded mall.
He'll be watching if you pass the test, because most don't. He'll take an interest in you. He'll come to you as a man in a dark cloak, and he'll ask you a question. A choice. One that only you can make.
I didn't run. But it wasn't out of bravery. It was because I was frozen in fear, my legs quaking beneath me, and in genuine tears that I hadn't spilt since I was a kid. I no longer needed to take that leak that I planned for. I stood there for another eternity, failing to catch my breath for much of it. Then, I saw him standing at the corner, staring at me. He wasn't a man in a dark cloak. He wasn't really a man at all. The tales twist over time through poetic embellishment and mistranslation, so what you hear is never completely truthful. Then again, nothing the storyteller's spin could prepare you for the reality of these things. There are simply no words to describe them. Even I am likely misleading you now, though I'm trying to be as literal as possible. Most cultures have their stories about him, and the way most describe him is honestly the most accurate way possible. He is a dark man at the crossroads. At all crossroads. And all crossroads belong to him. He didn't move at first. Instead, he spoke to me, and his voice was a soft breeze on the stillness, a wordless whisper. He did offer me a choice, though it wasn't a question. It was simply a curiosity for my will and true desire, if I truly wished what was to come. My answer came in spite of me, and the answer was yes. Yes, I would commit a sacrifice for his gift. Yes, a higher purpose mattered more than my life, and yes, I would do what was required of me for these things. He approached me, and I felt a biting chill blow past me as he neared. The closer he came, the less distinct he appeared. His shape wasn't that of a man, but that of a man's shadow suspended in the air, nebulous and immaterial. At a brief moment, I could see the vague suggestions of a face, but never enough to read his expression. He stood motionless before me for several minutes, and then extended to me one intangible hand.
Present the gambler with a possession of yours, an item of personal importance. He will turn it over in his hands for a time, understanding its meaning to you, and he will return it to you along with a gift.
I had nothing of particular value on me at the time, let alone a personal value. I felt through my pockets until I came upon my old Zippo lighter. An old girlfriend passed it on to me once she decided to quit smoking. Funny thing was, she picked up the habit again after the stress of the breakup, and she wanted it back. Perhaps for an immature laugh, I decided to hang on to it. That was about the extent of its meaning to me. I didn't love it, but I liked it, and I hoped that would be enough. He did just as Old Tom said, and I swear I saw a smile in those vague moments of his face. In those last minutes, he didn't just examine that lighter. He judged my value. Because this was not really a gift. It was an exchange. And after he was certain of his investment, he returned the lighter to me. As he placed the lighter back in my hand, the moment it touched my skin, the world went black. It was in that last instance of consciousness that I wished I had taken Tom's final words seriously.
He will return it to you along with a gift in exchange for 7 years of service. He always collects, so be sure this is what you want, lad. Be sure that it's worth it, because your life belongs to him now.
Since then, my life has been one of hazy nightmares, amnesia, and moments of clarity. I have gone to sleep at night, waking some days later in a sewer tunnel completely naked and holding mysterious, still warm, bloody masses in my hands. I have blacked out in mid-conversation, waking to see a television news report about a massive fire, and the arsonist fit my description. I have faint memories of places I don't recognize, people I've never met, and even places that shouldn't exist. I have torrential dreams of lands between, standing at my master's side like a pet on a leash. The next time I saw Jack, the friend I drove home that night, it was at the doorstep of his family home with his wife and 2 children. He looked well, even fit. When I knew him, he was a sloppy, overweight bachelor and had bad luck with women. He'd also worn a ponytail in those days, and he was now balding. He said he hadn't seen me in years, and that everyone assumed I was dead. I begged for his help, and the next thing I knew, I awoke in a dark alley somewhere. I was covered in bruises and cuts, and I was holding Jack's bloodied wallet in my right hand. I don't know how long it had been, but I have had a terrible realization. When it was said that he would demand 7 years of service, it didn't mean 7 years from that night. It meant 7 years in total. I am a slave, and I can be spirited away at any moment. Sometimes I'll be fine for months at a time. Sometimes I'll have my life back on track, assuming that the nightmare's over. But he always calls for me again. I haven't even had the time to learn of what gift he has given me. Like many people before, I am ensnared in his web, and until my debt is paid in full, I am an unwitting puppet. I may never be free. This is the last time I will say it. Stay behind your computer monitor where it's safe. You don't want to know. It's just not worth it. Convince yourselves that these things aren't true. Keep your curiosity in check. Force yourself to lose interest and find a new hobby, if you can. If not for your sake, then for mine. I've already found the blood of too many meddlers on my hands as it is.
Mainland Florida disappeared behind the horizon, leaving my girlfriend, her son, and me surrounded by the open Atlantic. I revved the boat engine, enjoying the warm wind and the ripples of sunlight dancing on the crystal clear water. Jordan tugged on the back of my shirt.
Where are we going?
I told ya, exploring. Now go bother your mother.
Hey!
He kicked my leg. Lindsay sat up in the hammock. Beads of ocean spray glistened on her oiled mocha skin.
Cut it out, boys. Mama's busy working on her tan.
Yeah. We'll be there soon anyway.
But where?
Jordan shook his hands above his head. I shrugged. Truth was, the place we were going didn't have a name. Hundreds of small islands dot the Floridian coast. Most of them are uninhabited and undedicated. Seeking a fun way to bond with Jordan, I had searched the maps online for one to visit. I ultimately chose a spot farther off the coast than I had originally wanted to travel because I was intrigued by the large structures that appeared to stretch along its sandy beaches like a row of dominoes. Staring at the computer monitor, I hadn't been sure whether the shadows were playing tricks on my eyes. I checked around the web and couldn't find anything about the place, except a crude drawing of the general region with the joke caption written in pirate text. Here there be monsters. Honestly, I didn't expect much to come from the excursion. At the very least, I thought checking out the small bit of land would be a good day trip. Lindsay loved to sunbathe, and Jordan always enjoyed adding to his seashell collection. And even if those structures turned out to be geological, I wasn't going to get upset. The island itself didn't matter. I just wanted to spend time with 2 people I cared about. A sense of adventure had washed over me the moment we left the marina. Once Florida was out of sight, I set the course to the unnamed island and took in all the beauty the sea had to offer.
Man, it's a nice day. Thank you for coming out with me.
Jordan replied.
Thanks for bringing us. Still not going to tell me where we're going?
Nope.
As we sped through the salty spray, I told stories of islands full of lost pirate treasures while Jordan listened in awe, and Lindsay kept watch for the occasional acrobatic dolphin or sailfish. We laughed and played as the morning wore on. I even let Jordan man the helm for a while. We were enjoying the trip, though after a few hours, the first signs of impatience began to spoil my peaceful, happy mood. We should have been getting close, and I had expected to see a few seagulls circling in the sky. Without a hint of land anywhere nearby, I began to worry. Lindsay joined me at the helm and kissed my cheek.
Mark,
Yeah?
how much longer?
I checked the map again. Are we on the wrong heading? I wondered. Jordan, standing at the bow, began jumping and waving his finger at the horizon.
Look, an island!
I let out a relieved sigh.
That's it. We're here.
I squinted.
But I think that's a key. Bit strange this far out.
What's a key?
I got this. Jordan, keys are formed on top of coral instead of from volcanic eruptions. So in other words, most of the sand you see isn't really sand. It's the bones of millions and millions of tiny dead sea creatures. Rah!
She turned toward me.
Right?
Close enough. How did you know that?
2 semesters of oceanography.
She winked and then went back to her hammock. I navigated the boat over a reef toward a small lagoon. Black coral reached from the ocean floor, harmlessly scratching at the bottom of the hull. Jordan dropped anchor where the water was shallow enough for us to swim to shore.
Oh, wow.
Lindsay murmured, staring at the huge square structure at the edge of the cove.
It looks like the ruins of some sort of ancient lighthouse.
Yeah, but I saw 6 of them on the map. Even if this used to be a shipping lane, no one would need that many lighthouses around a small key. I think they were watchtowers.
6?
She scanned the beach and then nodded at several piles of boulders scattered along the bank.
6 left standing, maybe. I bet there used to be even more.
The rocks were the remnants of another watchtower, a fallen sentry sinking below the shifting sands.
I think you're right.
Lindsay gave the monolith a nervous glance.
This isn't a good idea, Mark. We should head back.
Jordan whispered.
Do you think people still live here?
No,
I said.
Listen, just stay near the boat. I want to have a quick look around, and then we can go. Fair enough?
Okay, but please hurry. This place is creeping me out.
Lindsay stayed on the boat while Jordan and I swam to shore. Halfway there, I began to sense something wasn't quite right with the water.
I don't see any fish.
Jordan said. That's it, I thought. Something must have scared them away.
Swim faster, Jordan.
Why? Is there a shark?
He laughed.
Just swim faster.
We paddled hard until we reached the beach, both of us out of breath. Lindsay yelled,
You okay?
We're fine. I'll be back in 10.
I want to go inside with you.
Jordan said.
No way,
I replied, looking up at the watchtower. The top was like an open gazebo with a moss-covered, crumbling battlement held up by 8 stone pillars.
Stay on the beach. I don't want you out of your mother's sight.
With a sigh of resignation, Jordan picked up a flat rock and skipped it across the lagoon's calm water. I patted his head and then climbed up the bank to the base of the watchtower. The design was militaristic in nature, perhaps a Civil War outpost, or maybe a relic from the conquistadors of the 16th century. Either way, I was sure the island had once been a fort. How old are you? I wondered. I ran my hands over the smooth rock wall. A studded iron band wrapped around the foundation, thick as a bank vault door. On the ocean side of the watchtower, links of heavy chain, like those found on an ocean liner, stretched from the metal band out into the surf. The anchor point was a notch and lever system, though the turning wheel was missing. I imagine it had been used to pull a ship closer to the beach, or to keep it stabilized during a strong storm. After admiring the ancient ingenuity, I walked to the top of the dune next to the watchtower and examined the key as a whole. Other than the towers, the key appeared no different from any of the other uninhabited land masses in the general area. Then, once again, I felt as though something was wrong with the place. Like the island was somehow angered by our trespassing. I pushed the silly thought to the back of my mind and hiked down the other side of the dune through knee-high brush, most of it dead shades of yellow and brown. A sudden scream prickled the hair on the nape of my neck. I whirled and charged back toward the inlet.
Jordan!
Lindsay called. I reached the peak of the dune in time to see her dive into the water. I slid down the slope as she swam fast to shore. Jordan backed away from something on the beach, still screaming. When I reached him, he hugged me tight. I quickly looked him over. He wasn't injured, just frightened. "What is it, buddy? You're okay." Lindsay hurled herself up the bank, kicking up sand as she ran.
Is he hurt?
I patted his curly black hair.
No, I don't think so.
The shoe!
Jordan said, pointing behind Lindsay. She tilted her head to the side.
What? What are you talking about?
Looking over her shoulder, I caught sight of a dirty old sneaker lying in the weeds, far above the high tide line. Snakes? I wondered.
Lindsay, take him,
I said, prying his arms from my waist. I retrieved the sneaker and nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw the severed foot inside, bones dry and skin like leather. I dropped the shoe and looked from Jordan to Lindsay, holding each other in the large shadow of the watchtower. A ringing echoed in my ears, so loud that it would have drowned out the sound of birds, except that I suddenly realized there were no birds, nor, from what I observed, any other type of wildlife.
What is it, Mark?
We need to go now.
The key was a dead zone. My gut instinct at that moment told me a predator had marked the territory and chased away anything it hadn't killed. I ran into the water, treading and swimming. Lindsay and Jordan were right behind me. I dove and swam faster underwater, wanting to radio the Coast Guard as quickly as possible. That's when I first saw it. A massive black shadow coming in from the deeper sea. "Get back! Get back!" I yelled the second I surfaced, and I gestured wildly in an effort to wave them to shore. Seized by fear as I was, though, my arms refused to paddle. "Swim!" my mind screamed. But which way? I was closer to the shore, but I had to reach the boat.
Shark!
Jordan's call broke the mental block. I dove again and pressed on as quickly as possible. The thing was so massive and fast, growing larger with each heartbeat. but it didn't move like any shark I'd ever seen. Instead of darting straight toward me, the shadow slashed left and right, quick as a stinging bee. Suddenly, a second one jetted across my field of view. Then there was a third, and a fourth, and then too many to count. Underwater, my scream oscillated my eardrums as I spun, searching for the direction of the next encounter. The things were swirling around me like a vortex, lashing like soundless whips. I swam like a madman, and somehow I made it. Just as I gripped the first rung of the ladder, the boat vanished. It was taken so fast, somehow ripped down under the waves, that the force twisted my shoulder out of its socket. Then the suction pulled me under before my mind could comprehend what had just happened. I caught a better glimpse of what had taken the boat, and then fought my way back to the surface. Lindsay and Jordan were on the sand, screaming incoherently, but I was petrified. All I could do was gasp for air and wait for death to take me. The shadows in the water weren't separate creatures. No. They were all smaller pieces of a beast prehistoric in size. Violently, I was pulled beneath the surface again and couldn't tell up from down. Head over feet, I tumbled through the thrashing whitewash, lungs burning for air. Then my head cracked against the hull of my boat and everything went black. As the sun touched the horizon, Jordan found me half buried in sand near the center of the quay, bleeding from a gash above my eye. The thick, bitter taste of salt was the first thing I recalled, followed by the searing pain in my shoulder. Though I don't remember what had happened after the thing pulled me to the ocean floor, I know neither of them had seen it. If they had, a glimmer of insanity would have surely been present in their eyes. As I lay on the dune, assessing my wounds, Lindsay paced back and forth.
The lagoon receded so fast.
What?
The riptide pulled you down. I was sure you were dead.
It wasn't a rip.
We ran into the tower before the tsunami came crashing in. The water chased us up the steps. Mark, we almost didn't make it.
You did the right thing. I'm glad you're okay.
And you're lucky to be alive.
Depending on your definition of luck, I thought. Though she wasn't ready to face the truth, she was right. Somehow I had survived with only a dislocated shoulder, a nasty bump, and maybe a few cracked ribs to accompany my lacerated back. I stood, testing my weight. It would hurt to walk, but I could manage. The injuries were nothing compared to the bigger problem. Jordan cried.
What are we going to do? You told someone where we were going today, right?
Of course, I lied. Leaning on Lindsay's shoulder, I looked at each of the crumbling watchtowers in turn, then at the grim landscape. Scattered across the sands were pieces of wreckage from my boat, broken links of the thick shipping chain, and other useless debris. Total destruction. The way everything was soaked in salt oddly reminded me of the destroyed city of Carthage.
You look like you might have a plan,
Lindsay said. I nodded. I think others have been stranded here. Many, many others, trapped exactly like us. Maybe even the people who built this place up. We need to use a watchtower to signal help.
But the sharks sank our boat. They'll do the same to anyone else.
Not sharks. Lindsay furrowed her brow.
What?
Nothing. It isn't important. Right now, we need to find supplies. Just don't go near the water. We all went separate ways, planning to check around the island for anything of use. I found a few bone fragments of a long-dead castaway in one standing tower, and an old rusted sword in another, but little else. Along the way, I passed several fallen towers, nothing left of them but broken stone and iron links. The sky was crimson by the time we met back at the watchtower overlooking the cove. Lindsay hadn't found anything helpful, only some tattered clothing and an empty soup can. Jordan had discovered a few glass bottles and suggested we craft a message to launch into the Atlantic. A swell idea, probably the best that any of us had to offer. If only we had found a pencil. A large brass basin stood in the center of the gazebo level of the watchtower. I brought up a bundle of devil grass and driftwood. Though it took a while, I was able to build a decent fire using some long dormant camping skills. We sat near one of the stone pillars and looked out over the darkening sea.
At least it's warm,
I said. Jordan traced one of the markings etched into the pillars.
What do you think these mean?
I don't know. They look like crude hieroglyphics.
Lindsay stood and raised her voice.
I want to make a fire in each tower. The rescue party will have a better chance at finding us.
I'll go.
Your arm.
She sighed and then whispered low enough so that Jordan couldn't hear.
No one knows we're out here, do they?
No.
And it wasn't sharks?
No.
Lindsay walked away, then paused at the edge of the stairs, as if waiting for me to say something that would make the situation better.
Mom, I'm hungry,
Jordan said, breaking the uncomfortable silence.
I know. So am I.
I kept quiet. Aside from the fact that I didn't have any answers, I had read stories of stranded families in hostile environments. Sometimes people turn to cannibalism when the hunger grows sharp enough, first eating those already dead before turning on each other. Maybe that's what happened to the owner of the shoe. Or maybe his foot was left over from the creature's last snack. I wondered how long Lindsay's body would sustain Jordan and me. And when our eyes met, I swear she was thinking the exact same thing about my body. In either case, Jordan would be next, no doubt.
It shouldn't have to come to that,
I said, shaking my head. I took in a deep breath, tasting the salt once more.
There's something else about keys that differ from islands. They don't have any natural sources of fresh water. We'll die of thirst first.
Lindsay stormed away, carrying a flaming branch to light other signal fires. Jordan and I sat in silence, waiting for her to return. It wasn't the quality time I had hoped to spend with the boy. The sky darkened, and one by one, bright yellow lights sparked to life in each of the watchtowers. When the last was lit, the crash of a massive wave jarred me to my feet. Water spread across the quay, sweeping away what had remained of my boat. Then something roared louder than a howling tornado. My face went numb as my heart clenched. It was back.
We gotta go get Mom!
I grabbed Jordan by the shirt, and white-hot pain shot up my arm. Lindsay called from the top of the closest watchtower, and then screamed. The scream was cut short as her body ripped in two. to the sand below. A split second later, the fire in that tower suddenly blinked out. Jordan tried to yell for her. I held my hand over his mouth, muffling his cries. "It's too late. She's gone," I said, and released my grip, allowing him to run off to be gutted too, if that's what he wanted. Instead, he just stood there, shaking like a leaf in his red swimming trunks. Our watchtower began to tremble. I rushed to the edge and looked down. Though dark, the chain appeared taut in the moonlight, and the whole tower vibrated from the tension. Then my eyes were drawn to the other towers. Each light vanished as a long, spiky tentacle reached in below the battlement. The fires! "Jordan, quick! Put it out!" A tentacle shot by my neck. Nearly decapitating me. Deadly black barbs protruding from the slime-covered arm dripped black liquid. It lashed again, and I jumped back, almost falling from the edge. Jordan stomped at the flames, ducking as the trunk blindly twisted around the room. He smothered the fire while avoiding the barbs as they stabbed at the air. When glowing embers were all that remained in the basin, the tentacle slowly retreated. Panting, I looked out across the sea, following the mass of flesh as it gyrated away. "Are you all right?" Jordan gripped my hand and let out a hopeless whimper. Then he ran from the watchtower, howling an unearthly sound reserved for those who have had their sanity ripped to shreds. My heart broke for the poor boy as he crawled across the sand drift over to the top half of his dead mother. It was my fault. I had killed her by bringing them to the key. But my mind was too far gone to feel the pain. Behind the dunes, against the backdrop of an ocean of stars, the colossal creature stood in the open sea. It roared again. And I understood, as never before, how meager we humans truly are. Dozens of chains hung from its neck in tentacles. Most of the bindings were broken, and the few remaining were pulled tight against the watchtowers that still stood. It had been captured long, long ago, and the passage of time had not calmed the hatred for the jailers and their fire. Slowly, the massive black frame lowered into the water, disappearing under the waves. I continued to stare out at the serene night, certain no one had ever survived the key. Like those 1,000 fierce tentacles hiding just below the surface, I quivered and patiently waited to be free.
Dear Mr. Jennings, I'm writing to you because at this point I would like to believe my friend is still alive and you're someone who finds people for a living. I hear you won't take on a case without all the specifics, so I guess I should explain. I need to find a young woman named Amanda Moore. I've attached all the information I have about her, but it may well be the case she doesn't want to be found. Just hear me out before you go making any assumptions. I've never hurt or harassed this girl at all. I'm actually kind of worried about her, but no one will help me. Amanda, up until very recently, was a student at the University of Social Science, majoring in child psychology. She was the best in our year, easily, and in typical fashion seemed to have little to no interest in anything other than study. She'd probably been taunted many times before for being a know-it-all, bookworm, and kiss-ass, so it figured she had no desire to socialize. The first time I saw her was at enrollment, reservedly waiting on a chair to be issued her ID. I think it's safe to say I had a thing for her from the start. She was attractive in that unforced, natural kind of way. Plus, she was a redhead, and my track record definitely proved that I had a thing for them. I knew I just had to talk to this girl. Unfortunately, this was easier said than done. I spent the whole first year just trying to strike up a single conversation with her. I'd always try to sit next to her in class or at lunch, casting a friendly glance her way, and she would perhaps allow me the nicety of a polite smile or a nod before returning to the textbook she was poring over. It always felt like she was appreciative of the company, even for just a second before she remembered herself and was isolated again in her safe bubble. The thought had occurred to me that maybe she just didn't enjoy my company, but when I realized the small nods and smiles she gave me were more than most people got at all, I resolved to reach out to her. I forget when exactly, but there was one day where, as I lined up to buy lunch, that I glanced over at her, and she looked a little shaken, perhaps even trembling slightly. I reckoned, perhaps, she'd been on the receiving end of some derogatory comment from one of the class's low achievers, angry at her deserved success. I won't lie to you about my motives. You were once my age, right? Of course, I saw this as my chance to comfort her, maybe even her open up a little bit to me. I told you already, I was a little smitten with Amanda. I made sure I picked up the candy bar I usually saw her choosing at lunch. The worst she could do is just refuse it. The best, maybe stop quivering long enough to realize I could be there for her. I walked over to her secluded corner of the cafeteria hall and sat across from her. I smiled reassuringly and planted the bar down in front of her. I hoped it conveyed to her what I intended it to. I'm here. You don't have to be alone. I watched in horror as her eyes began to well up, softening her pupils into beginnings of tears. Crap. It was going terribly wrong. I was the last thing she needed, an unrequited crush muscling in to take advantage of her emotional state. Of course, this was a terrible idea. I cursed at myself in my head and began to stand up to leave. It was then her small, timid voice spoke out to me for the first time. It was compassionate and soft. Perfect for a child psychologist, I thought. It struck me as bizarre that I had never heard it until then. She simply said, "No, please, stay." A whole year spent chasing those 3 words. Oddly, it seemed worth it. I looked at her and her eyes met mine. "Sure," I replied. I was at a loss for words, but thankfully that didn't matter. It was Amanda who was talking, and I could finally listen to her. By the sound of it, she'd had a difficult morning. Part of our course involved working locally with real cases alongside other professionals in order to gain experience, and Amanda had been leading sessions with a little girl she referred to as Miss K. It was nothing personal, just confidentiality that dictated the alias, and we didn't like using numbers. It was too impersonal. Miss K was experiencing delusions and psychosis. Pretty heavy stuff, but again, Amanda was the best in our year. I expect she may well have offered to take such a difficult patient on. Her academic career was exemplary, after all, so it made sense she'd maybe sought after a difficult assignment. Amanda told me all she could about Miss K, that the girl was close to 8 years old and lived in an impoverished area of town, 12 floors up. Kay's parents couldn't get a word of sense out of their kid, and she was tearing up her room nightly, screaming at the top of her lungs. Recently, she'd taken to pulling big chunks out of animal plushies and clawing at wallpaper with her fingernails, too. At the end of their tether, They thought therapy was the only option left to them. Through the first few sessions, Amanda had ticked off the basics. No serious past traumas that could be responsible. No episodes prior to the current ongoing ones. She had done everything methodically and come up with nothing, save for a few suspicions about an upstairs neighbor who the girl often mentioned, and perhaps the temperature in Kay's room fluctuating at night as the girl complained in her ramblings about mold on the walls. It was this morning that Amanda had finally coaxed a somewhat coherent and detailed description from Miss Kay of the terrors she was experiencing at night. Amanda admitted to me that she'd been hesitant of hearing the full details of the dream. The girl had been clawing things to pieces because of them, but she felt that confronting the nightmares that seemed to flood the girl with fear was the only way to make progress. She confessed to gripping the edges of her desk apprehensively as she softly encouraged Kay to share what she was experiencing. Miss Kay talked of the lady upstairs, a grumpy, unsociable old woman who was often mean to her. The lady would make Kay feel sad and afraid, like she was angry at Kay for being young and happy. At night, in Kay's dreams, the lady found a way to push through the floor in her apartment into Kay's bedroom. The girl had described it while she shook in the elementary school-sized chair, her eyes reliving what they had seen inside her subconscious. The old lady had been slowly pulling herself through the ceiling in an impossible way that only dreams could allow, reaching out and grasping with spindly fingers that, despite their appearance of frailty, gripped and pulled with the strength of a vice. Her long, matted hair obeyed gravity and hung down, but the rest of her did not. The girl could see where the lady's skin touched the wall. It slowly began to spread blackness through the wallpaper as if rotting it, inflecting it with mold. And there the old woman clung, slowly pulling herself downward towards Kay, as if fighting the seizing up of wretched, clicking bones to make contact. Of course, Miss Kay used childlike terms, but Amanda felt like she could see into the scene the girl's language painted for her. Dread and confusion filling in the gaps of the description with horrors born of Amanda's own deep fears and imagination. She had seen in her mind's eye the small girl frozen to her bed, weeping in terror as a filthy and decrepit mess of hair and cold skin pulled itself eagerly towards her from above, rotting the wall itself with the faintest touch. It was a glimpse into the madness that Miss Kay found herself in at such a young age. Struggling to keep herself composed, but ever the professional, Amanda talked Miss Kay through coping mechanisms and things she should try. Perhaps in the dream, if she could muster any kind of movement or speech, she should address the nightmarish vision of the lady upstairs and assert the facts, that it was a dream and that the lady wasn't real. Perhaps, outside of the nightmares, she could visit the real lady upstairs and try to have a polite conversation with her, recognizing that she was probably just a lonely old woman lashing out without realizing. Perhaps these things could help. Amanda felt she was clutching at straws, but this was more than just academic prowess. This was a tortured little girl's stability at stake. At that point, the session had come to an end. Amanda felt a small twinge of consolation that Miss Kay's demeanor seemed lighter than before. Perhaps just the act of recalling the events of her nightmare to someone else for the first time had gone some way to clearing the young girl's head. In fact, as the girl left, Amanda noted she had seen Kay smile for the first time since her sessions with Kay had begun. It was possible that now the girl felt armed with tools she could fight back with. Ever since the session, though, Amanda struggled to get the mental image of that horrendous thing to leave her. I spent that whole afternoon talking with her in the hall. I think I had a class I should have gone to, but that was the furthest thing from my mind. I did my best to reassure her that, actually, she'd probably help more than she realized. Kay now had some defense mechanisms that might assist her in defeating those issues. The nightmares sounded awful, but they weren't Amanda's horrors. Miss Kay wasn't really a case for students, and that, all things considered, Amanda had coped pretty well. About 5, she headed off, but she thanked me and said she'd let me know how the case went. She seemed a lot more settled and even chuckled a little when she realized she didn't even know my name as she said goodbye. Pushing my luck a little more, I said I'd go one better and give her my number, too. She took the scrap of paper I wrote on it from me. I hoped it wouldn't find its way into the trash. She didn't call, but roughly a week or so later, she came up to me in the lunch hall with a rapturous smile painted all over her face. It occurred to me that I had never seen her genuinely excited before. Of course, it was cute. Miss K had just had what Amanda believed would be the last session at the university. There was a tremendous increase in her mood, and she reported that she had stopped suffering from the nightmare a few nights before. Kay stated, with visible enthusiasm and appreciation, that Amanda's idea had worked. Within her dreams, Miss Kay had watched the lady from upstairs manifest herself once more through the ceiling, and although as terrified as ever, Kay had felt inspired by Amanda's suggestions. She had whispered out, timidly at first, but soon gaining a defiant tone with each uttered word, until she claimed she was shouting wildly at the woman. "You're not real. Miss Morris said so," she had called out as loudly as she could. "Why don't you just move away? Bother someone else." Shortly afterward, Amanda received glowing praise from the department, clearly cementing her reputation as their star student with a promising future in the field. I wish I could say this is how the story came to an end, but if it were so, I would not be writing to you. Several days after, I finally got that phone call from Amanda, but it was not the one I had hoped for. I suppose at least my fears of her discarding my number were put to rest, but it was little comfort. She called me at around 4 in the morning, with the sun only just beginning to threaten the coming of an early dawn sky. I answered in a daze, having been just wretched from sleep. The words were worried and rushed. Something about a dream, the lady upstairs, and Amanda had run from her room in halls. My mind fumbled like someone who wakes in the dark and must blindly collide with various pieces of furniture until they find a light switch. I asked her a few questions to ascertain exactly what had occurred. Amanda had been feeling unwell, so she had gone to bed around 10 and had just woken up screaming, bathed in sweat. She described what she had seen in her dream to me, the lady upstairs. In explicit detail, she told me how, through adult eyes, she had seen the terror that Miss Kay had spoken of. A lurching, hunched old woman with mottled skin had appeared to her. In the nightmare, she had been aware of a scraping wooden sound like the scratching of mice between floorboards above, and had turned her head to see fingertips with worn-away nails prise their impossible way through the ceiling. She stuttered through tears that the plaster had crumbled and fell onto her cheek, and despite it being a dream, she had felt it. Then she had seen a pair of eyes, not blank, twisted, or demonic, but human. Eyes that were filled with the glee the hungriest of predators must reveal when they see a long-awaited meal. They were unyielding portals into a horror unimaginable. The lady upstairs had reached her long skeletal arms toward the uniform beige walls of Amanda's campus room and made contact with them. At her touch, small dark spores of mold had outstretched downwards as if guiding the way she would take. Fibrous and squelching, it spread oppressively along the wall. Amanda noted the whole atmosphere of the room felt damp and muggy as her breath caught in her chest, leaving only the sound of clicking arthritic bones, the clawing fingers, the arms, even the rib cage as it rattled with the lady upstairs' own breathing. She said it felt like the old woman was pulling her way out of some twisted place far beyond the realms of our understanding, and with each inch she came closer, becoming more human, more alive. Amanda at this point was screaming within herself, but she could make no sound. As the lady came closer, it was all she could do but to try and concentrate and think. It's in her nature to have all the answers, I guess. She groped around her now blurry memories and came to the very same words Miss Kay had revered with some sort of magical power, and with conviction managed to quietly utter them. "You're not real. This is a dream, and you are not real." The words left her mouth, and she felt a slow, burning warmth in her chest, the fire of hope. The lady upstairs stopped moving immediately. Another log on that hopeful fire. "You aren't real," she exclaimed, louder this time. The static creature drew breath slowly and heavily. It began to make a rasping noise, and Amanda's heart leapt at how wounded that sound appeared to be. However, the hopeful fire inside was snuffed out in an instant as the rasping became slow, hacking laughter. The lady upstairs reached both hands out suddenly, stopping only a foot or two from the bed and Amanda. She pulled herself down the length, her swaying, bedraggled hair catching dimly in the moonlight, the blinds cast across the wall, her face coming into view inches from Amanda's. The lady's hair hung downwards like a curtain, blocking and enclosing Amanda's view, so their vision was locked on each other. Hungry eyes stared into the rabbit in the headlights that Amanda now knew herself to be. Cold, foul-smelling breath escaped the sneering, semi-living corpse of the woman as she opened her mouth to speak. Amanda was repulsed by a set of broken, decaying teeth that sat in what was now a blackened, jagged grin. "I am real." Amanda had woken clutching her chest, hyperventilating and queasy. She had fled her campus room in an instant after hurriedly dressing, was now sat in the 24-hour library on campus talking to me because she was starting to lose it. It was unsettling in the least to hear of the dream itself. It conjured up frightening mental images that, frankly, I didn't need. However, this drew out the empathy in me. I didn't like it, but I wasn't the one who had to live it. So I listened. I comforted as best as I could, and tried to reassure her. We were all under a lot of pressure on the course, and Amanda had probably felt it much more recently due to the distressing nature of Miss Kay's case. I told her that she was shaken when Kay had initially described the nightmare, and maybe on a deeper level this was all still playing on her subconscious. She listened. She seemed to accept some of what I was saying, but still she sounded distant, like it didn't all add up, and she maybe already arrived at why. I offered to come over to the library, but she assured me it was okay. After the call, I took a shower to try and shake off the sleepiness, grabbed 2 coffees from a machine in the library's lobby, and made my way up to where she was anyway. She didn't sound okay to me. When I arrived, she wasn't there. I was met with an empty room, the only sound the low hum of artificial light and computers ticking over. I drank the coffees and messed around online for a while, but I couldn't really get either Amanda or the lady upstairs off my mind. Amanda was clearly experiencing the same kind of nightmare that Miss Kay did. I guessed it was psychosomatic. Sorry, you'll want layman's terms. Psychosomatic means experiencing physical symptoms, but those symptoms originate from mental or emotional causes. I thought maybe Amanda's dreams and subsequent elevated heartbeat, breathing, and anxiety were all being caused psychologically by her closeness to the upsetting case. The ideas of an animated cadaver emerging from above had been planted in her mind by Miss Kay. I tried to call her a few times throughout the day. She didn't answer. I left it at 4 calls. I thought that any more would put me in the stalker category. I guess, as she demonstrated at 4 a.m., if she needed me, she would get a hold of me. She never called. In fact, until this very day, I haven't seen or heard of her again. It's been about a week. What I've managed to piece together is that she conducted a home visit with Miss K after calling me that morning, a kind of follow-up appointment, essentially proving aftercare for the girl. I know a friend in the admin systems for our department who turned a blind eye for a few minutes, so I could get my hands on the case documents. She'd come back from that visit and logged it, a small description, simply stating, "The girl's nocturnal episodes have ceased largely due to the lady living above her moving." I took a printout of this with me, so I knew where to go. When I went to Miss K's address, I became at first confused, then very disturbed when I could find no floor but the apartment the young girl lived in. Through the same friend who allowed me access to the case files, I caught wind of an immediate transfer request to an unspecified university submitted by Amanda on the same day when she returned from the home visit. To be honest, I didn't understand, but I wanted to be able to. I kind of hope it wasn't me that caused her to leave, but I'm sure, as you know, it's not easy to shake that feeling that your advances, however well-intentioned, can cause apprehension and upset. When I went to the heads of department about her sudden disappearance and whether we should get the police involved, they shut me down. They were cold towards me, as their star student was getting out of town in a hurry, and I was the only person who had been seen with her recently. One lecturer implied rather unpleasantly that he had concerns I'd been stalking her, as I'd been seen on several occasions with her of late, and it was a well-known fact that Amanda didn't keep friends. I believe they hold me responsible, and there's not much I can do to dissuade that. Hell, you might as well think it too, spinning you a story of nightmares and strange old ladies that aren't really there. If you find her, talk to her. Let her know I'm desperate to know she's all right, that I figured out what was going on and I'll want to help. If she doesn't want to know me, fine. I'll be cut up about it, but whatever she wants. All I really need you to do is just tell me that she's okay. I don't need to know where she is. No stalker would be satisfied with just that, but it would be enough for me. I know what's going on, and I'm genuinely concerned. I boosted one of the skeleton keys the cleaners use when going through halls to fix up campus rooms, and got into Amanda's room yesterday. She left in a hurry, leaving a bit of a mess in her wake. Above her bed, though, was a rather large patch of dank, dark mold clinging to the wall. The clump ended in long, slender, outstretched drips, kind of like fingers. The lady upstairs is real, and she did move from Miss K to Miss Moore.
Smoking pot is how I've managed to waste most of my time. I'll lay with my back against the gritty roof shingles and look up at the stars, just wondering what my little place is in the universe. Nothing seems so important once you've wrapped your mind around your sheer cosmic insignificance. The entire planet barely holds any weight in the vastness of the universe. What great things could a mere earthling hope to accomplish as one of its 10 zillion temporary guests? This is the kind of insight that will save a guy a lot of stress and pressure. It's also the kind of insight that kept me unemployed, single, and sleeping in my childhood bedroom for 35 years, in no danger whatsoever of achieving anything with my terrestrial life. And with my dad's life insurance money running out fast, my future looked as bleak and finite as the rest of the universe. And if you're wondering right now, Chris, doesn't it get old? Yes, it sure does. On a whim of stoned epiphany, which typically fuels my most ponderous creative inspirations, I thought I'd turn over a brand new leaf. I typed a combination of words into my search engine I had never typed before. Job opportunities. I had this tangy sensation like I had done something naughty. With the recession and everything, the depression if you asked most people, there were few results, and even fewer I could see myself doing for 40 hours a week. The only jobs I managed to dig up were a few entry-level openings at none other than Flurf International, a baloney company whose reputation rivals the cigarette conglomerates. My dad told me once, the best jobs centered around doing work no one else could stomach. He made a decent living cleaning up Port Authority bathrooms because very few other people wanted to do it. And with good reason. One morning, someone saw the bottoms of his boots poking out from under a toilet stall door and called the police. They found him on his knees and knuckles with his face in an unflushed toilet. He had been stabbed. They never caught the killer, who had made off with no less than his lunch money. Whatever stigma an entry-level job at Flurf International might carry, I probably wouldn't get stabbed and dunked in a toilet. So what the hell, I thought. Look out, world, here comes Chris. With my underwhelming work history, 0 qualifications, and no references, I completed the form in milliseconds. Pertinent proficiencies, none. Political affiliations, none. Hobbies and/or interests, none. I couldn't have made myself seem like more of a simpleton. The truth is, I wasn't really trying, only trying to convince myself that I was trying. I knew I was unhireable. At least I could tell Mom I applied for a job. I'd make sure she was sitting down when I told her. She'd probably faint. But I was the one who nearly fainted. The hiring department called me back the very next day and said they wanted me in for an interview. And when they decided they liked me and told me where and when to show up for new employee orientation class, I was stunned. I walked out of the hiring office that day in a daze. Flurf International, a substantial corporation, wanted me as an employee, wanted to offer me opportunities for growth and advancement. Me. The implications shattered my comfortable state of complacency. What in the world was happening to this little earthling? So here I was, at the crossroads. I'd been given an incentive to change my ways, to clean up my act and start living like a real adult, to make a living, and eventually a chance to move out of my mom's house and get my own place. To finally move out of my mom's house, just thinking about it was so surreal I could barely believe it. That day in the hallway of the hiring office, I resolved to myself that I'd give it my best try, and in a move of faith that betrayed my DNA down to the last gene, I went home and flushed the rest of my stash down my mom's pink porcelain toilet. Chris was starting anew next Monday morning, Bethesda's newest member of the workforce. By the first new employee orientation class, I hadn't smoked pot in nearly a week, and I was feeling pretty chipper. I was there early, just sitting by myself in the chilly institutional gray classroom, awaiting my destiny. The wood-grain plastic desks and painted cinder block walls reminded me of high school, and I realized just how long it had been since I had ventured outside my comfort zone. Naively, I fantasized about my professional potential. I came up with corporate-sounding titles for my future positions: District Logistics Manager, Director of Assets Management, etc. I was plotting my own success story. Other new hires began filing in, and the chairs all filled with faces unaccustomed to the morning, most of them baggy, unshaven, and clinging to styrofoam coffee cups. There were 12 of us in all, in 4 rows of 3 seats. I sat in the back row next to a portly fellow named Derek and a shaggy bohemian named Brian. Once we started chatting, it seemed fitting we had sat together. We were back row types of guys, unexceptional mid-30s bachelors, each as surprised to be there as the next. Even Brian, who seemed convinced that any form of employment was mind control, recognized his luck in being offered a paying job. Most notably in common, we were all potheads who had recently quit to take a stab at the working world. Our instructor came into the room carrying a big binder labeled Itinerary. He stood at a little podium and opened the binder and flipped a few pages and cleared his throat. "Welcome, new employees," said our instructor. "I'm Clyde Everett, new hire orientation director for Flurf International. Before we begin, a little about myself. I've been with Flurf for 15 years. I started in preparation, moved to merchandising, and then to management. As you can see, there are plenty of opportunities for advancement in this growing company, and with hard work and dedication, you can build a great career with us as well." A few of the newbies nodded appreciatively. "To begin, I'll be playing a video presentation introducing you to something you're all quite familiar with, but likely haven't had the chance to fully understand. This video is entitled, Food. Why Flurf is Food. He turned on the lights and started the video, which was projected onto a plastic sheet on the wall. The video was nearly too cheap to take seriously. It was a kind of salesy chiropractor's office pitch designed to convince us that Flurf bologna was indeed real food. Being a former pot smoker, all I could think about was how utterly bizarre and trippy it was. 45 minutes later, here's what we had learned. Food is comprised of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Water, vitamins, minerals, all those are in there too, but the calories that make up any meal are comprised of protein, carbohydrates, and fat. 7, 7, and 9 calories respectively. So if there were any preconceived notions about the quality of the product, remember that Flurf has a macronutrient ratio of 10 grams carbohydrate, 5 grams protein, and 8 grams fat. It even has fiber, 1 gram per serving. Flurf bologna is indeed, and meets all the necessary qualifications to be considered viable, edible food. You can totally eat it, and people totally eat it all the time. Dude, Brian whispered out of the corner of his mouth, this whole smoke and mirrors game is full of subliminal mind control tactics. He had whispered sentiments like this through the entire video, giving the whole presentation the feel of a high school detention. They think I don't notice, dude, but I see all. My mind is a psychic planetary force. If my mind is what they want, I said, it's a fair price to pay to move out of my mom's house. Don't look at the screen, Brian said. Focus somewhere else. Focus on the wall or something, so it looks like you're watching, but don't look, or you'll be inundated with subliminal suggestions. Not everyone can catch them like I can. I should have worn my tinfoil hat, I whispered. What? Nothing. The instructor turned up the lights and walked back to his podium and opened his itinerary book. Any questions about the video? He asked. No? Good. Now that we're all clear what food is, this next video highlights the merits of Flurf and explains the mission statement of our company, to feed the world at all costs. Then we have a special surprise for all of you. He started the next video and turned down the lights and went back to sit off in the corner. The gist of the second video was this. With the world the way it is nowadays, overpopulation, food shortage, widespread disease, malnutrition, and starvation, the old benchmarks of quality food need desperately to be reevaluated. Food is calories. Maybe it's difficult these days to come across a grass-fed filet mignon with a side of organic asparagus spears. But you know what? If you aren't such a picky Pete, you can generally get yourself a nice Flurf sandwich. And for $10 a day, the price of a cup of coffee, you can provide a slab of Flurf bologna for a starving third world family. Maybe it isn't the nutritionists, the environmentalists, and the vegans that have the answers to the world's real problems anymore. The real answer, argue as they all may, is Flurf International. While the narrator fed us these facts, the screen played a pleasingly hypnotic display of dancing molecules, presumably proteins. I'm starving, Derek said. Those Flurf molecules are making me hungry. Isn't that weird? Mind controlio, sang Brian, elbowing me. Let's just pay attention, guys, I said. They might quiz us or something. I told you, don't look at the screen, Brian said. I knew it. You've been mentalized, dude. Give me a break. You guys hungry? Derek said. I'm for seriously starving. Subliminal suggestion, dude. Believe me, you're the least starving person here. Derek folded his hands over his belly. How rude. I'm just saying, said Brian. When the video was over, Everett turned up the lights and walked back to the podium. Any questions about the video? No? Good. We have a special surprise waiting for all of you, but first, a little history. He flipped a few pages of his itinerary book. It all began in 2031 in a small garage in central New Jersey. The modest beginnings of a company destined to change the way the world eats forever. The lone employee of the fledgling company, son of an environmental engineer, had a garage and a vision. That vision was every man, woman, and child on the planet enjoying a bologna sandwich. And that vision was the seed of the company that would one day become Flurf International. And that man was CEO Trevor Tannery. And now, on behalf of CEO Tannery, I'd like to present you all, fledgling employees with big dreams for the future, with a nice Flurf witch, compliments of Flurf International. Right on cue, the double doors to the hall swung inward, and an unenthusiastic black dude pushed in a rolling cart with a large deli tray. The room filled immediately with the preservative tang of Flurf. "Everybody enjoy a Flurf witch," Everett said. "Eat and be filled." Derek stood right up, patting his belly. He looked quizzically around the room. No one else seemed to be so hungry. "That's the spirit, Derek," Everett said. "Enjoy a nice Flurf witch." "Well, I suppose I'm obliged," said Derek. Brian leaned and whispered, "Derek is dangerously vulnerable to hypnotic suggestion." Maybe he's just hungry. I'm hungry too. I'm just not into Flurf. Too salty and rubbery and strange. Not to mention the burps. My sister always has Flurf burps. They'll raise the dead and kill them again. "Come on, everyone," said Everett. "Show some support for the product. You're part of the team, aren't you?" He was looking at Brian and me when he said it. Chairs creaked as the others got reluctantly from their seats. Brian and I looked at each other. There was no avoiding it. We got up and joined the others around the deli spread. "This feels more like an initiation than a special surprise," I said. "Chew carefully, dude," Brian said. "If you feel anything crunchy in your mouth, don't swallow it. It could be a microchip nano-mind-controlling device." "Delicious," said Derek, wolfing down huge bites. "I love Flurf. You know who else does? Twinkie." "Twinkie?" I asked. "My cat. He loves Flurf more than I do." "Slow down," Brian said. "You heard what I said about chips." "Chips? Who brought chips?" 2. I woke up before the alarm on day 2 of orientation. Amazing how easily I hop out of bed in the morning since I quit smoking pot. Just refreshed and ready to go. But the nights were when I paid for it. I'd just sit there completely sober, not knowing what to do with myself. I weathered the boredom by watching nature shows on TV. The Wildlife Network was my favorite. Lots of amazing animal footage. By the way, did it ever occur to you how much leniency the networks give to animals? We show them committing murder, having sex, all sorts of unsavory stuff you'd never want to see people do on network TV. Worse stuff even. I watched a troop of chimpanzees track down a family of colobus monkeys and eat them alive. So add cannibalism to that list. You know who didn't seem to find it so offensive? Flurf. They sponsor the whole series, among many others. We took a tour of Flurf's preparation and production facilities. They made us sign non-disclosure agreements, and our phones went in a cubby to be returned upon our exit. No cameras were permitted anywhere, not even security cameras. This, they explained, was for concern that any of Flurf's technology would get into the hands of competing companies, which could compromise their share of the marketplace. Flurf's preparation and production processes were sophisticated, they told us, and needed to be carefully guarded to protect the value of the product. "Dude," Brian said, reluctantly signing his form, "I smell royal major league mind fuckery." "I smell a paycheck. I'll sign whatever they give me." "The devil may care type, huh? Reckless, dude." "Whatever," I said. The instructor punched a code into the security keypad, which I happened to notice was 35873, numerical for Flurf, and the doors to the preparation area opened onto a large chamber. We walked out on a graded skyway between the mouths of giant metallic vats bubbling with thick pink sludge, pouring steam into the humid air. The sludge, explained the lady leading us down the platform, was Flurf bologna in the making. I could see why nobody wanted cameras in there. It looked about half as appetizing as the finished product. Not surprisingly, Derek thought differently. "Oh man," he said, "I could jump into one of those vats and just eat and eat." He patted his belly. Brian cringed. "Ugh, you're an animal." Steepling her fingers, the guide began her presentation. "Well, I'm sure you've all wondered at some point how Flurf got to be called Flurf, and I'm here to show you there's more to it than a cute name. These are Flurf's top-secret atomization vats, where the ingredients are mixed into the uniform paste that eventually becomes everyone's favorite sandwich stuffer. Now listen closely." She grabbed a lever protruding from the control console of the vat and pulled it. Then, Flurf! Oily bubbles rose to the surface, popped, and wheezed. A hot breeze passed over us like a massive Flurf burp, rustling my clothes and curling my nostril hairs. The ripples in the Flurf folded in on themselves, and the goop's surface returned to normal. "Did you hear that funny sound? I know you did. That's the sound that gives Flurf its name. The Flurfers send a superheated blast through the paste, giving it that uniform, perfectly mixed consistency it's known for. It also sterilizes the mixture, ensuring a healthy and hygienic product with a long shelf life. The sound of our Flurfers is the heartbeat of Flurf International. We're so proud of it, we named the product after it." "Dude, these vats are radioactive Holocaust machines." "Have you indeed ever seen a radioactive Holocaust machine?" "Just did, dude. Hope you wore your lead jockstrap." "You're wearing a lead jockstrap." Truthfully, if he had been, it wouldn't have surprised me much. I was starting to believe Brian was fairly bananas. After completing new hire orientation, Brian, Derek, and I were placed together in production. It was a big, white, Flurf-redolent lab with 12 air-compressed tubes from the preparation area snaking down from the ceiling like vines. On each tube was a valve. You fit the bologna skin on the end of the valve, pull the lever to fill it with hot Flurf, twist the end, cut it off, and roll it down the chute to the packaging area. You could always tell when a new vat got tapped. The Flurf came out like a fire hose, and you had to go easy on the lever. Of course, the work didn't match up with my new fantasies of big-shot corporate success, but I knew that wouldn't come overnight. Meanwhile, the only part of the job I found really unpleasant was the smell of the bologna, which seemed to work its way into my pores. This only made me more motivated. I wanted to climb my way up the ladder and get out of the factory and into an office, like Mr. Everett had. I often renewed my resolve to stay on the straight and narrow until things panned out. I stayed focused. I had a clear vision for the future. In the meantime, we made bologna from 8 to 6 with a 1-hour lunch break in between, which we usually took together in the cafeteria. Derek ordered a double Flurf burger every day, and that's only because a triple wasn't on the menu. Brian usually ate chips, and I had chocolate milk. If you didn't like Flurf, your options were drastically limited. "Monotonous work is a tactic to foster mental conditioning," Brian said. He'd said that quite a few times lately. There was probably some truth in it, but what difference did it make? We had to work anyway, didn't we? "Who cares?" I said. "We have to do it, so why complain about it?" "Life is about more than work," Brian said. "Maybe these corporate goons don't get that, but I do." "I agree," said Derek. "Life is about enjoying life, for seriously." "All I've had up until now is life," I said. "I've front-loaded my life with life. I figure now I have a lot of work to do." "So you're gonna work your ass off for the rest of your life?" Brian said. "Then what?" I had no reply for that. I was stunned, actually. Brian had just disturbed a delicate balancing act in my brain I had been performing successfully for more than a month. The question was one I had asked myself countless stoned and introspective nights, and I'd never had an answer to it. No answer at all. Here's the thing. My decision to turn things around had never been based on any deeply understood or conclusive revelation, only boredom and some ephemeral wave of interest I'd been trying to ride as long as I could. And now he had to ask me the big question. Why work? Why care? Why bother? With your infinitesimal presence in the universe, why? I'll tell you who's a real company man, Brian went on. Derek over here. Just look at him. He's practically made of flurf. Guilty as charged, Derek said. You are what you eat, right? Brian chuckled and got up from the table. I'll be back in 5, he said. Maybe 10. He headed out towards the bathroom. I watched him disdainfully as he left. He had really rubbed me the wrong way with that comment of his. It hadn't been on purpose, of course, but he had sure fingered my self-destruct button. I'd try to forget it. The guy ought to have his prostate checked, I said. He's in the bathroom constantly. Derek took a while to reply. He was chewing. He isn't pissing, Derek said. No one pisses that much. You know what he's doing. What's he doing? You can't tell? What is it? He's toking up. What? You think? Oh yeah, totally. How do you know? I can tell. He looks lit up every time he gets back from his little bathroom trips. He's probably got a one-hitter. I hope not. He's going to get himself fired. Maybe he secretly wants to get fired. No way. Why would he want that? Some people just can't get out of their own way. He's one of those guys. He'll never cut the shit, believe me. I can't explain what happened to me just then. I was electric with frustration, like something had been triggered in my brain. I thought I was just irritated with Brian's weak will, but no, that wasn't exactly it. I was imagining how much sweeter that chocolate milk would taste if I were high too. My mouth went dry and I felt my heart rate quicken. Damn it, Derek, the three of us just couldn't hold it together, could we? He looked confusedly at me while he chewed. Huh? Seriously, is it really that hard for the three of us to just not get high? If Brian can't even make it, what the hell are our chances? It's just him, though, he said. We're still good, aren't we? I thought we kind of had a thing going, that's all. Solidarity, you know? So what are you saying? Just because he can't do it means we all screwed up? I don't know anymore. Brian noticed us examining him as he came back to the table. Now that I was paying attention, it was obvious that Derek was right. Brian was high. What? Said Brian. Where have you been doing it? I said. Doing what? We know, Brian. You know what? You're off the wagon. Nah, dude, I'm good. He looked into his bag of chips. It's obvious, Derek said. We're not dumb, you know. I can beat the tests, dude. I know what I'm doing. I have these pills, and if you take one a half hour before... But where? Where can you spark up and nobody can smell it? Brian paused. I found a place, he said. Yeah, I gathered that much, but where? Why? You're not thinking of... Fuck it, I said. Where is it? The look on Brian's face had changed from guilty to eager. Seriously? Said Derek. You coming? I said. He just stood there a moment, then slapped down his Flurf burger. Well, fuck it, he said. It was a well-ventilated maintenance room behind the first-floor stairwell in the rear of the building, not far from the nook with the bathrooms. We called it the crawl space, but there was plenty of room for the three of us to pass a joint back and forth and blow the smoke through Brian's fabric softener sheet filter concoction. All you had to do was get there without being seen, and you could hide out as long as your absence raised no eyebrows. 3 hits in, the shadows from the slats in the air vent were like tribal tattoos on the wall. 5 hits, and it occurred to me that the insulated I-beam overhead was preventing the building from crashing down on me, and I was overwhelmed with reverence. I missed the hyperbaric thoughts and sensations, and after so much time sober, I was primed for them. Brian let us use his eye drops, and we all headed back to the production area, ready to finish the day stoned to the gills. I was trying to decide then, while I packed my next bologna, why the hell a place would prohibit its employees from smoking marijuana. It made everything so much more enjoyable. Maybe Brian was right. Maybe the forces of mind control were at odds with us after all. "So those pills," I said, "they really work?" Right away it became a daily thing. For weeks we spent half our lunch breaks in the crawl space and the other half cramming junk food into our faces. If drug testing came up in conversation, we simply changed the subject and pretended there was no way it would happen to us. The typical addict's way of dealing with problems is to ignore them, and that's just what we did for almost a full month of stoned regression. The initial blast of it, the full-bore high, steadily gave way to common stonedness. Pretty soon, those old sentiments were crawling back into my thoughts, the ones that tried to tell me I was wasting my time trying to live like everyone else, just working my way into oblivion. What was the point? Just toke up, relax, and ride this life out in comfort. Why strive? Why deprive yourself? It's only a matter of time before we're all worm food. Through it all, and I'm not sure how, I managed to keep that little pilot light of faith burning dimly. There were moments I nearly gave up and quit my job, yet this little sober angel on my shoulder always told me to stay. But as far as ambition went now, I was resigned to remain a simple baloney backer. One night I lit a joint and lay under the stars the way I always had, but the sky just didn't look the same to me. I looked up at the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. The closest star in the group is 58 light years away, and the furthest is 124. I'd always thought it was ridiculous to associate them with one another at all, but now it truly had no depth. All it was now was a dipper. The sky might as well have been a TV screen, and the stars an episode of the latest pop American sitcom. Whatever magic chemicals the pot squeezes out of your brain weren't there anymore, only the sluggish side effect that accompanies them, just the way it had been when I'd quit the first time. In a mere month, I had managed to become a stoner again. I'd always thought pot was the solution to life's doldrums and anxieties, at least until I'd gotten hired at Flurf. But there's a sneaky cumulative side effect to drugs. Once the spacey nonsense is wrung out of your brains from years and years of use, all that's left is an underachiever on his mom's roof, looking up at the stars like an asshole. The foggy realization came to me that I was sabotaging myself yet again. I needed to get off my ass, and while I was at it, off the roof and back on my feet. I made a private oath that night, a promise to the universe I haven't broken to this day. I had a good thing going, and I would never again do anything to stand in the way of my career. My job came first, before any personal desires, personal feelings, or personal anything. I'd take every opportunity I could get, and I'd never quit. I was back on the wagon. Look out, world. Chris is back. 3. Back at Flurf, Derek and Brian were still up to their old lunchtime tricks, but I'd told Derek I was back off pot, and this time for real. Brian accused me of having been mind-controlled and subscribing to elitism and all that, and I told him if I ever needed a career counselor, I'd ask him for his opinion. As stoned as he was, my sarcasm wasn't lost on him, and things were never the same between us. Soon after, I started spending my lunch breaks alone. It was the right thing to do to avoid temptation. Everything went smoothly for a week, until the day I got the bad news. I was sitting on one of the hard plastic benches in the break room, reviewing my protocol handbook, when the door swung open and in bounded Brian, looking uncharacteristically shaken up. His normally half-masted eyelids were rolled up like spring-loaded blinds. I had never seen him like this before. "Dude." "What?" We just stared at each other for a moment. He didn't seem to know what to say next. A few of the packaging guys peered disinterestedly from behind their flurfwitches, then went back to eating. "Dude, come outside a minute." "What is it?" "Just come on." I got up and followed him out into the hall. His eyes were darting around crazily, and he couldn't stand still. "Relax, man. What is it? You on uppers or what?" He drew a deep breath. "Me and Derek, Smoked some crazy shit in the crawl space. Someone was outside the stairwell, so we freaked out and decided to go upstairs and sneak back through the preparation department. So we're out on the skyway, and Derek says he's starving, and he leans over and tries scooping up some flurf, and his leg goes over the thing and he falls in the vat. What? Where is he now? In the vat. Is he okay? Brian appeared even more uneasy. I was so high I didn't know what to do. I went back to help him, and I figured I'd turn off the thing. I don't know. I started messing with the controls, and then the flurf thing went off. What? When did this happen? Like just now, dude? What do we do? For a second, my body wouldn't even respond. Then I got a hold of myself and started running. Brian ran behind me. I remembered the code to the preparation area and punched it into the security console. We'd be in trouble if we got caught in here, but foremost in my mind was Derek. God, I hope he's all right. It was just the two of us on the elevated pathway between the vats. Brian stopped me at vat 6. He was here, dude. He just went right over. Oh my God, his mouth was open. You could see the stuff rush in his mouth. Maybe he got out. Maybe he's all right. I saw him go down when the flurfer went off. He sank like a rock. We have to tell someone, I said. What does it say in the procedurals for this? I opened my handbook and started flipping through. We can't, dude. We can't just leave him in there. We can't get him out either. He's flurfed, dude. He's flurf. Derek is flurf. I stared into the churning meat. You could feel the heat coming off from the last flurf. Little bubbles still bursting on the surface. Brian was right. There was no getting Derek out of the vat. He was gone. We were silent, walking back to the break room. We sat back down at the table. Brian was wringing his hands together. So what the hell are we supposed to do? I said. We can't just not report it. He fell in. It was a terrible accident, but it wasn't your fault. It was his fault he fell in there, dude. But I'm the one that hit the flurfer. They'll think I murdered him, dude. I'll end up in prison. I'll get the electric chair. All right, quiet down. That was an accident too. You had no reason to hurt him. They'll drug test me, dude. They'll never believe me. Even if they believe me, I'll still get fired. I'll never get a job again. Well, let's think about this. You have those pills you said. They don't work, dude. Get real. Maybe if you smoked like once or twice, but I smoke all day every day. Someone died? It's not like nobody's going to notice. Just saying it felt so bizarre. I couldn't believe Derek was dead. Brian paused. His expression swiftly changed from freaked out to assertive. Then when both of us get fired for failing our drug tests, we can sit at home with no money again and feel happy we did the right thing. And neither of us ever have to worry about working again because nobody will hire us. First of all, what do you mean both of us? I had absolutely nothing to do with this. If you tell you do, I'm not going down alone, dude. I quit. I haven't smoked for over a week. It's in your system for 2 weeks and you know that, friendo. We stared coldly at each other. It was clear what he was getting at. I know you want to do the right thing, dude, but the right thing is the wrong thing right now. Derek lost. We don't all have to lose. I sighed and crossed my arms. Derek lived alone in a room, he went on. He had no family, only a stupid cat. We're the only people that know he's gone, and we're the only ones that are going to know, because if I go down, dude, I'm taking you with me. 4. It used to freak me out to imagine that we're all made of the same stuff. I mean everything. Planets, stars, people, animals, vegetables, bacteria, viruses, all the same stuff. You could extract the molecules out of any star in the sky, take it apart, and put it back together to make an exact working duplicate of any of us. Even the intangible stuff, thoughts, emotions, consciousness, they're all somehow made of stuff. And if you wanted to, you could take any of that stuff back apart and squeeze it together in some cosmic cheesecloth, and you'd have yourself a star. Now sober, my thoughts were grounded. I had time to think about what happened to Derek and all the implications. I don't know why it took so long to occur to me, but I realized that Derek would soon be squeezed into 1,000 sandwiches. Choosing not to come forward about the accident meant more than just negligence. It meant people were going to eat him. The thought of it made me want to light up a joint and just float away. But I'd made a promise. I'd come this far and I wasn't about to give in. Plus, once I'd been clean for a full 2 weeks, that jerk wouldn't have anything left to hold over my head. The next morning, Tom, the floor supervisor, walked over to Brian and me just as we were getting ready for our lunch hour. "Guys, I could be wrong, but wasn't there another one of you new guys?" "The fat guy?" Brian said. "Yeah, I just figured he quit." Tom looked at me. I couldn't make eye contact with him, so I just looked down at my work. "Figured he quit," I said. "Why would he do that?" Tom said. "Seems unlikely he'd quit a perfectly good job." "Maybe he just didn't jive with the mind control of corporate America," Brian said. "Who knows? You haven't heard from him at all?" "We didn't even really know him," Brian said. "Nope," I said. At least that much was true. Tom just stood there a minute, nodded, then walked away. I felt a bead of sweat roll into the small of my back. "How long are we supposed to keep this up?" I said. "What do you mean, how long? He quit, that's all." I didn't reply. "Dude, I know you want to do the right thing. I get it. Guys like you want to do the right thing all the time. But trust me, there's no reward in it." Maybe he was right. I didn't know. But it felt totally wrong. All the new employees were to gather in the auditorium for a speech from the seldom-seen CEO, Trevor Tannery. I sat in the back row, and when Brian got there, he went ahead and sat next to me, leaving one seat in between. I don't know what he was thinking. It's not like I wanted to hang with him anymore. The guy accidentally murdered our friend, and now he's basically holding me hostage. He's probably just keeping a close eye on me, I thought. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Well, I had my eye on him, too. At 10 a.m. sharp, the CEO came out on stage. Trevor Tannery wasn't how I'd pictured him. He was tall and muscular, with extravagant wavy platinum hair and severe features. His suit looked custom, but he seemed to wear it like a uniform. He also didn't look like a man who ate much flurf. He looked more like a man who ate his competitors. He spoke in a southern accent and with such a deep, resonating tone that he probably could have gotten away without using a microphone at all. "I'd like to personally welcome you all to Flurf International. As the world's finest and fastest growing baloney company, we're excited to hire new employees to help us meet the needs of our customers." "Mind controlio," said Brian. "Flurf all began with a vision, and that was every man, woman, and child having a bologna sandwich. With your help, we're making that dream a reality every day." The newbies applauded half-heartedly. "You might hear people talking about Flurf International in your everyday lives. Chances are you already have, and unfortunately, they're not always such nice things. Now, it's human nature to criticize what we don't understand, and sadly, to shy away from the things that make us uncomfortable. Hunger, overpopulation, these are a couple of things that also make us uncomfortable. Unlike our naysayers, Flurf isn't afraid to address these issues, and we've built one heck of a business around it. We understand that inexpensive, plentiful food sources are absolutely crucial as the population continues to increase. Ugh, I'd rather starve. Humans lack the foresight to address our greatest threats. Again, it's our nature, but it's important for you all to fully understand the big picture. Naysayers harp on about organic food and evil factory farming and local crops, etc. That's fine, but what we're doing here overshadows petty concerns. While they worry about antibiotics and hormones and spliced genes and other trivialities, we feed those in need. As employees of Flurf International, you can be sure that you're a part of the solution. So whether you're packing, preparing, mopping, taking inventory, or whatever at all you do for Flurf, be proud. Our mission statement: to feed the world at all costs. Thank you. Did you catch any of that? Brian said. I was covering my ears. Something about a company-wide drug test? Very funny, smartass. That night was clear, a night I'd typically do some stargazing, but I was trying not to waste my time with that anymore. I didn't even put on the Nature Channel. Too much to contemplate. Sober, I stared at some sitcom the rest of America was watching. I wondered if everyone else was chuckling along with the poorly written dialogue and canned laughter. Hard as I tried to enjoy this regular guy stuff, I couldn't manage a laugh of my own. But I'd keep at it, I thought. A zillion Americans couldn't all be wrong. At around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. Hello? Dude, this you? Brian, where'd you get my number? Something happened, man. What happened? I was sitting here getting high, and I just started thinking about what happened to Derek. And then I started thinking about his cat. All right, so? I thought I'd sneak into his place and see if he's all right. Maybe feed him. I don't know. I felt guilty. It's this weed I just got, dude. It's like sentimental weed. So what happened? I was walking around his building looking for a way to get in, and when I went around the front, the cops were there. And I freaked out, and they asked me what I was doing, and I didn't know what to say, so I said I was there to visit Derek. And they said he's missing. That's why they were there. And so they started asking me a whole bunch of questions. I was freaking out, dude. What did they ask you? When was the last time I saw him, if he had any enemies, if he owed anyone money? I said no. The last time I saw him was at work. I don't know, dude. They took my info and everything. I'm just freaking out right now. We should just come clean, Brian. This is getting out of control. We can't. Then the cops will know I lied. I'll be a suspect. Damn, I'm so stupid for even thinking about Derek's stupid cat. So stupid. Goddamn weed made me all sensitive and shit. It's like I mind-controlled myself or something. Just forget about it for now. We'll talk about it later. Yeah, all right. I'll see you at work. Fine, bye. I put down the phone and collapsed back on my couch. Suddenly I was gripped by anxiety, and with it, an almost overwhelming craving for pot, which hadn't happened since that time in the lunchroom. Damn it, I didn't need this. I didn't need any of it. I wasn't even with him when this happened. I had nothing at all to do with it. Now I had to suffer through the stress of it? While I'm trying to change my lifestyle and do the right thing, this jerk is allowed to smoke all the weed he wants and sabotage my sobriety to boot? What the hell am I protecting him for? I sat there and mulled it over until the sitcom's credits scrolled down the screen. For all I knew, Brian might be right after all, that there was no reward in doing the right thing. There was also no absolute guarantee I could pass a drug test if they decided to spring one on me now. I sat thinking about it for a while. For better or worse, I made my decision. 5. In the morning, Tom told us we'd have a busy day. One of the vats was ripe and ready, and today they were tapping it. The flurf would be coming down like lava, so we had to be ready to roll. Which vat? I asked. Why, doesn't matter, Tom said. I sensed Brian looking at me. Just curious. Vat 6, I think, he said. Not that it matters. Of course it mattered. I admit, a lot of animosity had worn off since the night before, and I woke up with roughly half the determination I had when I made up my mind. But now the idea of what we were about to do soaked sourly into my stomach. Brian seemed to sense something was wrong. He was paying very close attention to me. I could feel it. You all right, dude? You look a little pale. I'm fine. You sure? Yeah. Is it about the vat? Dude, we'll have that thing empty in 2 days, then this whole thing is over. We're home free. I couldn't believe this guy. The jerk missed every point there was to be made. What about the fact that we were about to make baloney out of a human being and send it to 1,000 supermarkets? Home free in 2 days, he says. What a jerk. I gotta go, I said. Where are you going? We're about to get started here. Nowhere. Don't worry about it. Dude, are you cool or what? I took off my apron and started walking to the exit. I felt Brian's eyes at my back as I went. Closer to the door, I picked up my pace. Dude, no! I heard him behind me and I sped up to a lope. He knew what I was up to. Just like that, the cat was out of the bag. Dude, don't be stupid. You're gonna get us both canned. You'll be sorry. I ran up the stairs and down corridor 3 towards preparation. Halfway down the hall, he'd become too winded to continue his tirade, and I heard him wheezing. There was no discussion to be had anyway. I had my sights on the doors at the end of the corridor. Whatever the outcome, I was putting a stop to this right now. At the end of the hall, I punched in the code, 35873, and the magnetic locks released their hold on the doors. Just as I pushed through, I saw a group of VAT techs gathered halfway down the skyway, all looking up at the ceiling. Wait, said Brian with his last gasp of air. I stopped, but it wasn't because of his insistence. Nobody heard our entrance over the rumble of the tubular machine descending from the ceiling. It looked like some kind of giant woodwind instrument moving over the vats like the claw of an arcade crane grabber. I hadn't noticed the machine during orientation, and none of the instructors had mentioned it to us. Stop it right there, came a booming voice, and the machine clanked to a stop above one of the vats. The voice sounded familiar. When I saw one of the technicians step aside and pull back his face mask, I realized why. It was Trevor Tannery, the CEO. What was he doing here in preparation? Brian's footfalls came to a halt behind me, and his hand landed hard on my shoulder. Dude, seriously, you can't... That's 50% four-leggers by weight, one tech told Tannery. Top her off and we'll call it a flurf. Very good, said the CEO. In the meantime, go ahead and tap VAT 6 for production. I paged Tom and let him... Wait! The three techs and CEO turned their heads at once as I approached VAT 6. The CEO watched me with a wrinkled brow. Y'all one of the new production men, aren't you? He said. How did you get in here? I looked over my shoulder at Brian. His eyes were as wide as saucers. There was no turning back now. I was coming clean. Mr. Tannery, I'm sorry to barge in, but there's something very important I have to tell you. It's about VAT 6. You can't tap VAT 6. He watched me suspiciously. Why is that? I took a deep breath. I knew what I wanted to say. I just couldn't find the tact to say it. So I just started talking. Someone fell in there a few weeks back. A new employee, Derek. He was running through here and he fell in the vat. It flurfed him. He's dead, and he's in there. I didn't know how else to put it, but I'd said what needed to be said. I could only imagine what Brian looked like standing there behind me. I knew I'd opened a big can of worms, but it had to be done. Mr. Tannery stepped in closer. Are you sure you saw this happen? I wasn't there, but he was. I pointed at Brian. The CEO shifted to Brian, whose eyes bugged out like ping pong balls. Is this true? The three other technicians watched without expression. There was something about the way the CEO spoke now that commanded everyone around stop and listen. Brian was wringing his hands. He's a crazy dope fiend, this guy, he said. He's always making up crazy stories. It never happened. You should drug test him, you'll see. He's a liar, I snapped. He's afraid for his job. I turned to Brian. No problem beating Derek to flurf customers, huh? I'd like to see you eat some yourself. He's crazy, sir. Don't listen to him. He needs help. Asshole. Dope fiend. You're the dope fiend. Hold your horses, Tannery said. Does anyone else know about this? Just Brian and me. We'd have told you earlier. It's just... You say the fellow fell in there? About how much would you say he weighed? The impulse to argue between Brian and me gave way to confusion. We looked at each other. Did we hear him right? I'd say about 250, Brian said. Closer to 300, I said. Why? Well, which is it? 250 or 3? Brian and I looked at each other. maybe 275? Tannery was doing some calculation on his handheld device. All right, we'll go with 275. The machine clanked into action and repositioned itself over Vat 6. Tannery hit a button, and a squeaking mass fell down the chute into the goop. Then another, writhing bodies and tails. It was a second or two before I realized what they were. They were rats. "Let those flirt a while," said Tannery. "I'll add the long poke to Vats 3 and 5, and we'll tap 6 tomorrow." Did he just say what I thought he said? I looked back at Brian. Even he was stunned. Tannery turned to us and saw we were both pie-eyed. Maybe Brian had been right. I never thought for a second anyone but the prep guys would be in there. And here was the CEO staring at 2 trespassers having blatantly broken into a top-secret area without permission. We were in trouble. "I was trying to do the right thing, that's all," I said. It had been the right thing to say. Tannery's expression softened. 6. If you had asked me 10 minutes earlier what would be happening right now, I'd have told you the place would be flooded with security. Instead, we seemed to be getting a personal orientation course from Tannery himself. The matter of Derek had quickly fallen to the wayside. Apparently, Flurf's way to deal with a catastrophe is to dump rats on it. Just the 3 of us on the Skyway, the CEO pacing. He said, "My father was an environmental engineer with the Federal Wildlife Commission. He said to me once, 'When there are too many mice, Trevor, add cats.' So let me ask you this. What do you do when you've got too many cats?" "Add dogs?" Brian guessed. Tannery shook his head. "I thought you'd say that. Problem is, now you've got too many dogs, and soon you've got too many rats again. Every effect has a side effect. Ask any pharmacist, he'll tell you. The trick to treating the world's sickness is to create effects whose side effects are also desirable effects. You follow?" I nodded. He went on. "The only variable to produce my effect, like a gene in a strand of DNA, lies at the top of the food chain. In the natural order of things, the predators at the top need to be kept in check. I'll start where my father left off. Too many mice? Add cats. But what happens when you've got too many cats and the supply of mice are insufficient? The answer is a simple subdivision at the top of the food chain. At the top are the cats, and one step below that are now the other cats. The cats, at least the ones that know what's good for them, eat the other cats. The side effect? Exactly what we needed in the first place. Fewer cats, understand?" "I think so," I said. "Sure," said Brian. "The instinct to survive and reproduce is strong in humans. It surpasses all reason. We've known for many generations that the population would one day reach critical mass. I was the first man willing to put reasoning before instinct, and the answer was simply this, a simple subdivision at the top of the food chain." "I don't quite understand the food chain thing," I said. Tannery grinned. "I know you don't, so I'm going to show you." He reached back into his pocket and took out the remote control. "Surplus people are everywhere. This bunch here are undocumented imports. They may look different, but they taste the same as everyone else. Side effect? National security." He pressed a button, and a ruckus filled the tube from the overhead machine. One by one, scream on scream, little brown people dropped from the mouth of the tube into Vat 5. "What?" I said stupidly. I watched as they tumbled in. When the surface of the Flurf was writhing with flailing arms and legs, Tannery flipped the switch and the mass sucked down into the pinkish depths. I felt a wave of stinking heat breeze past my face. Bubbles rose to the surface and the mass was still again. "There's steel, rape, and murder and end up in prison for life with the good taxpayers footing the bill. That's no way to pay your debt to society. So how to make restitution? Feed the needy. Side effect: save taxpayer dollars. He hit the button and in dropped people. There must have been 50 of them. The vat seemed to boil with score after score, all dressed in orange prison garb, all fighting to stay above the surface. Tannery fired the flurfers, and they were sucked into the mix. Brian and I looked at each other. Is this for real? They come in shipping containers from places like China and India, barge after barge of them. Their governments promise them better, more useful lives in America. Well, we send them back containers and containers of fluff to feed the people. Side effect: less people to feed in the first place. The flow of people down the tube seemed never-ending. Maybe 100 of them, maybe more. One managed to hold on to the edge of the tube for a moment before losing his grip and falling in. Tannery had to pulse the flurfers several times to keep the vat from overflowing. By the end of it, Vat 5 was brimming with pink goop. "Oh my God," Brian said. "I knew you'd say that," Tannery said. "Strange how no one ever has such spiritual sentiments while enjoying a flurf sandwich." The CEO approached Brian. "So now that you know what you know, tell me this. I started this company as a young man in a garage with a couple of Cuisinarts. Do you believe a man with a poor judge of character could operate in such a business as I do?" "A poor judge of character? He's a radioactive Holocaust machine." "I guess not," suggested Brian. "That's no baloney," Tannery said, "and I know baloney when I see it." He seized Brian by the lapels and hoisted him up and over the guardrail. With a yelp, he splashed into Vat 5. He came up flailing, wheezing for breath. I backed away until my spine hit the opposite rail, my fight-or-flight response seemingly short-circuited. Tannery was standing at the console, watching Brian struggle to keep his head above the surface. "Help me," he gurgled. "You're fired," Tannery said, and flipped the switch on the control board. The flurfers flurfed. Brian's scream lasted only a fraction of a second, and I knew he had just disappeared into the pink vortex. He was gone. He was flurf. Tannery turned to face me. There I stood, frozen with fear, my back pressed to the guardrail. The techs stood like sentinels at either side of the skyway. I was cornered. Below me bubbled the hot flurf of Vat 7. 7. I remember a college course I took during my 2-semester attempt at a higher education. It was one of those bullshit one-credit courses I can't even remember the name of. The professor was hell-bent on scaring the shit out of us. The world, like any other closed environment, has a capacity, he explained. There's only a certain amount of people that can live on Earth. When the capacity is reached and eventually exceeded, what would happen? He believed the whole world would collapse at once, like a stage with too many performers. Inevitably, a single man or woman would be the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back. I raised my hand and disagreed. Could the world truly approach capacity? If we got even close, wouldn't people also die off at a proportionate rate? Anyway, the news these days seems to be filled with exactly that. Mass die-offs from disease and starvation, notably. The ongoing epidemics in Africa, perverted versions of the flu widespread in South America, mutated childhood diseases defying vaccinations in America. As insistent as we are on reproduction, the planet continues to shake us off like fleas. I still don't believe the Earth's population could ever reach critical mass, but that's because the faster you pour us on, the faster we seem to spill over the edge, like an overflowing bathtub. But is this really any more comforting than Mr. Sims' theory? Years go by pretty fast already. The idea of people expiring like mayflies only makes the human experience seem less important to me. Being a person is just the strangest thing to do before you return to the dirt. So that's how I got my job in quality control at the world's biggest baloney company. I kept my promise to stick with it no matter what, and for what it's worth, I think my dead dad would have been proud of me. He always said the best jobs are the ones that are hardest to stomach. My mom, she can't believe her son has finally grown up. But I don't feel that way, like I grew up late. I feel like my long journey of drugs and leisure has come to its natural conclusion. It was what CEO Tannery told me that day he offered me the position. Sitting there in his office, smoking his cigar, feet up on his desk, he filled in the blanks for me, and no joint, no bong hit, no strain of nuclear marijuana could ever have made it clear. I'm no longer tempted by drugs, no longer tempted by the promise of some secret wisdom therein. I lay sober on the roof of my own place now, looking up at the clusters of quarks in the sky, and I've never felt so strange, not even when I was stoned out of my mind. I picture being on some other planet, light years away, maybe some inconsequential little rock orbiting around the end of the Big Dipper and looking up at the little blue dot of Earth. Maybe our sun is part of some silly constellation to this particular place, maybe the power cord of the big toaster. And I'll be damned, does it really make a difference what nastiness, what ugliness, what darkness goes on down here? Or whether I should work hard or just ride this life out in comfort? Or what my little place really is in the universe? There's a reason these riddles are so elusive. Because if you pursue them to the edge of the cosmos and back, stars become rocks, planets become dirt, and people become meat. Blend you up, young man, and you're made of the exact same stuff as everything and everyone else. And every one of these little atoms you're made of is billions of years old. They came from distant galaxies. They've been rocks. They've been plants. They've been animals. They've been human beings. They've been eaten by saber-toothed tigers, velociraptors, and pterodactyls. They've been eaten by Cro-Magnon man, eaten by Neanderthals, eaten by modern man, and shit 100 million times. Every atom of your living body has always been there, and it'll live again and again, forever and ever. That kid in Vat 6 will live again. Our friend in Vat 5 will live again. Every Mexican, Indian, Chinaman, Eskimo, convict, cow, pig, fish, horse, chicken. All the creatures that go into Flurf brand baloney, they'll all live again and again until the universe is reduced to quarks and the quarks are reduced to nothing. The world, the universe, everything, it's all baloney. So eat and be filled.
I woke this morning with a migraine. I'd never had a migraine before, so I must say it's quite the experience. I could barely think. The pain was agonizing. Alas, I found no way to make the pain subside. It does not seem to want to go away, and my right eye felt as though it needed to escape my head. If things keep going the way they are, it just may. When I woke, I was on the floor of my apartment. Place I'm not accustomed to waking. The world around me seemed to plot against me every moment. Everything seemingly in my way. Even my body seemed resentful to my need to stand. Almost unnatural. I was born a man, not a rock. I have a need to get about and do things. It is my right as a functional creature that I should be able to move properly. My first thought was, dear God, I had a stroke. I couldn't remember going to bed last night, let alone the floor. My feet trembled violently, protesting my will to stand up. The trembles flowed from my legs and into my body. This all made no sense. I felt as a neglected machine being started after years of non-use. Now, on my feet, I figured I needed to get to a hospital, so I made my way, although it was slow going, to the phone. I tried to flip open the cell, but it kept slamming shut. The dexterity was lost in my fingers. I could move them a little, but no longer could I wiggle my fingers freely or make a fist. After several more failed attempts, I gave up. The hospital is 10 blocks from my apartment. Although most likely ill-advised, I decided to walk those 10 blocks. Really, I had no choice in the matter. I was grateful to have a first-floor apartment. Every step gave me the impression the earth was trying to reclaim me. More and more gravity seemed to double, but somehow I continued to move. I felt like I was at the helm of some lumbering machine that had not been oiled in some time. It took me 1 hour just to reach the end of my block. There would be 9 to go. I realized it impossible to try and go any further. I needed to try and get someone to help me. Everyone I passed by regarded me strangely. It was the look I had used myself on occasion.
You're disgusting.
It was a look of detached disgust. It was the look one gives a homeless person, or anyone else for that matter, that finds themselves at the receiving end of a prejudice. I have no problems with most people, but I have stepped over 1 or 2 homeless people in my time. Not that I'm proud of it. I'm just a victim of my culture. I tried in vain to get people to dial an ambulance for me, but most just sneered. I suppose that the way I was moving was almost as a drunkard would. A few people even told me to get a job. This was outrageous. I had a good job selling cars. I could faintly hear myself calling out to them. I heard what they heard, and it came out as a low gargle. Instead of the "Please call 911, I'm in serious trouble" that was in my head, I turned. For the first time since waking that morning, I saw my reflection. In addition to my apparent stroke, a case of palsy had set in parts of my face. My eyes resembled that of a bloodhound, and my mouth was slack and drooling. I also realized that I couldn't feel anything aside from the pain in my head. I figured it was why I had so much trouble opening my phone. This was also, I found, the reason for everyone's negativity towards me. Because in my current condition, I really did look like something that had fallen out of the bowels of the local pub. I saw a few hold their nose as they scowled at me. Then there was the smell. It was sweet, almost like good barbecue. My migraine subsided a little, so naturally I followed my nose. I thought all my problems may be related to blood sugar, and I should eat soon. In a way, I was right, but I was not a diabetic, nor have I ever been. My nose led me down an alley, and down another path, and into another alley. I found a homeless man sitting by himself. He was cooking some hot dogs on a loosely fit homemade grill. I thought if I had my wallet, I would give him all the money I had. About $100. If I could have just one light. I found that a strange hunger was building, and I almost couldn't stand it. The smell of cooking meat drew me in. My legs seemed to move better, and the weight lifted from my shoulders. I drew closer, and he looked at me, holding tight to his finger. He had a grimace of pain, and I could see that he had apparently burned himself while cooking the hot dogs. The closer and closer I got, he looked confused at my movement. He motioned for me to have a seat and a bite of his dinner. Still grasping his finger. I apparently looked bad enough for him to show mutual respect for what he thought was another wounded soldier thrown aside by society. Closer I came, and we were still locked in each other's gaze. I got close enough to grab a hot dog and look down to it. Strangely, I found it was not the source of the delicious smell. I could still smell the sweet smell in the air that had reminded me of that good old barbecue I once had in Kansas. My migraine was ever receding, being replaced by this intense hunger. I didn't know where the smell was coming from, but it was close, and I was lost in it, almost euphoric. I could taste the cooked meat on my lips as the scent hit my nose. The smell was becoming ever so intoxicating. It was the hobo. He had burned his hand, cooked it, if you will, and there was no stopping what happened next. I tried to stop, I truly did, but my body had taken over. There was something needed. It was something unknown to me that my body was suddenly craving more than my ability to stop it. I will never forget the look
in the man's eyes when I grabbed a hold of him with a grip that was vice-like. I had no idea that I was capable of this. I then bit his face. He in turn screamed. His skull broke under another vicious bite, and that was the end of his screaming. The grave matter was sweet. Yet, sweeter than any piece of candy. More delicious cake I had ever had. It is a strange thing realizing you've become a zombie. But really, what can you do but go with it? So I kept eating until I had my fill. Feeling much better. Also able to move much better. I decided to distance myself from the unfortunate gentleman now lying, dying, or dead on the ground. I did feel bad about what had happened, but I really did not have control over what had happened. I figure he'll just have to forgive me because what else can he do? I watched him twitch his last death throes. At least I could show him this respect. After all, I had just turned him into food. I figured I should say a few words, but my mouth was no longer an effective means of communication. I then decided that if I were a zombie, and indeed seemed that way, I would have to make peace with eating people. I frightened myself with the ease in which I accepted my fate. I was still myself, but who I was had changed in an instant. You never know what's going to happen in your life. You can adapt or fade away. I was in the mood to survive, even if it meant adjusting my morals some. I didn't want to kill people. Really really, I don't. I did make a decision, however quickly, that I would at least try to stick to eating people that wouldn't be missed as much. Other homeless people, etc. Also, I needed to find who did this. If indeed there was a person to blame, and make them reverse it. If indeed it could be reversed. Until that day, I will continue to adapt and become what I have become. If I have become a zombie, then so be it. I will do what I need to survive as one. To persevere is to be human, even if not. Please don't judge me, because I know not the things I may have to do.
Chilling tales for dark nights.